Welcome in. Thanks again for joining me. Today, I'd like to discuss a little bit on how to work with our judgmental thoughts. This is actually a question from one of you who regularly listen to my podcast and possibly YouTube channel. And actually, I've probably gotten this question from more than one person over the years. As when we start to meditate, we also start to see all of the, let's just say, stuff going on in our crazy mind, right? In our thoughts. And, often when people are just beginning a meditation practice, or maybe they're a couple years in, they might get concerned because we start to see more of our stuff. We start to see actually what thought rumination looks like, the rampant thoughts we're having. And obviously, not all of those thoughts are pleasant. And so there's nothing wrong with us. There's nothing going wrong in our meditation, in my opinion. It's just that we're looking, we're finally looking at our mind, which is a good thing in the long run. But of course, in the short term, it can be a little disconcerting and it can be alarming for some people. And also, I'll acknowledge it can actually be a cause of stress where, the meditation industry often likes to promote meditation as a de-stressor, which it can be. But when we're actually practicing meditation authentically, when we're training in mindful awareness and seeing more of our thinking mind, for most of us, it can, at least for a short period, cause a certain amount of stress, just seeing how wild the mind is. And as I said, in the Buddhist tradition, we see this as a good thing, because we're finally acknowledging what is. And, just like in any kind of health imbalance or health issue physically, we need to first see what's going on to know what kind of medicine we need to apply. So we need to acknowledge the problem. If we're not able to acknowledge the problem, we're not able to go to a doctor, and the doctor's not going to be able to treat us, right? So in a way, we start to, see the predicament in its fuller nature. And ultimately, I think that's a good thing, as long as we're able to connect with practices that do help us to ground and settle in that process. And so I'm not going to go into that in this episode, but I have a lot of content on that, finding practices to ground in the body, more breath and somatic practices for finding a bit more calm, which I recommend is not the purpose of meditation, just as something very useful for us along the way, for the very reasons I'm talking about. So we can learn to bear witness to the mind more compassionately. And in particular, as I said, I want to discuss our judgmental thoughts. So I don't know about for you. For me, I would say the majority of my thoughts are somewhat judgmental. And some people might be shocked to hear that. And for me, I'm not that ashamed of it, in the sense like I don't have to act out every judgment I have. And I'm also not so surprised. I think for many years, this was initially, for some years in meditation, in my meditation practice, this was something that concerned me, because I thought, oh, am I a bad person? Am I doing something wrong? And then I realized this is kind of the nature of what the confused mind is. The confused mind is a judgmental mind. So in one way, I'm not saying don't do something about it. Obviously, it's good to do something to work with our judgmental mind more skillfully, because, who's the one who suffers the most from that? We do, right? So we need to learn to work with it, but we also don't have to beat ourselves up for it. So that's the first kind of thing I would recommend. Don't beat yourself up for your judgmental thoughts. Instead, what we do is we learn to bear witness to them. We learn to watch them. And watching them really comes about through a process of training in a mindful awareness practice. And I'm using those two words specifically because, this word mindfulness is kind of a buzzword, for the last 10 or so years. But really, for me, mindfulness is an aspect of awareness. And awareness is this greater or larger quality of mind we're born with, but we don't often access very much, which is like a double knowing. It's an awareness of. So there's a sense of ourselves. There's a sense of our thoughts. There's a sense of what's going on around us. And how to say it? this is just a quality of the mind where we can bear witness, we can be watchful, we can know what's happening, right? But we're not just having a raw knowing, we're also knowing we're knowing. So that's why sometimes we call it a double knowing. There's like a knowing of what's going on around us, but there's also a double knowing. There's a sense that we are knowing, right? So again, I don't need to go too into the weeds with this. It's not so complex when we connect with it in meditation. And if we just like the word mindfulness, that's fine too. But either way, that's how we grow the strength to watch our judgmental thinking mind, just as we might watch a clear sky and watching the clouds move through that big blue clear sky, right? So we learn to watch our thoughts like we would watch clouds moving through the sky. Now, of course, realistically, on the way to that, how to put it? Normally what we do is we're not aware of the sky. We're just caught up and entrenched in the clouds. And for most of us, we think we are those clouds. That's why our judgmental thoughts affect us so much. So this is the first training. I would say that might be some kind of a midterm intention or aspiration you can cultivate to become more watchful of your judgmental thinking mind and basically giving it less power. We don't have to personalize it. And also we don't have to act it out. We can just allow judgmental thoughts to arise and fall. Because actually, if we're able to allow them to arise and fall, what's the problem? They're not really affecting anything. They're just arising and falling, right? Just like waves on an ocean. So this is the first thing I'd recommend. And of course, that's more of a mid to long-term project. I think there's this element of compassion. And compassion is this word that can mean so many different things. And I use it pretty specifically, of course, like a little more aligned with a Buddhist ideal of what that means. And this is our ability to bear witness to confusion and pain. Right. And pain has many different, levels, right? Pain just doesn't mean physical or emotional pain. There can be the, subtle anxiety as a form of pain. I would consider judgmental thoughts themselves also a form of pain, right? Dissatisfaction in Buddhism, we would also put into that category of something painful, right? Something uncomfortable. We can use that word as well. And so compassion is our ability and our willingness to meet those areas of discomfort, to meet those areas of pain in our life. And of course, some of them are going to be more out of reach. Some of them we're not going to be able to meet, or they're going to be too overwhelming. That's totally fine. Let those be as they are. We don't have to push ourselves. But within our judgmental thoughts, there's an area kind of related to the first thing I said, which is just holding ourselves in more compassion, and holding our thoughts in more compassion, especially our judgmental thoughts, that there is some amount of discomfort when they arise, and allowing ourselves to soften towards that discomfort, allowing ourselves to soften also, as I said in the first kind of key point here, to soften to ourselves, that we're not a bad person. We're just going through life. We're trying to do our best, right? And of course, we can start with some coaching like that, but there's a deeper element of compassion where the heart just breaks open and there's a kind of tenderness that arises. And embedded in compassion is also insight. There's forms of wisdom also in compassion when that happens. So, whatever that means to you, how to access that tenderness, whether it's you want to use some constructive thoughts. I really recommend somatic practices where we drop into the body and connect with the feeling world, which means we connect directly with the feeling around the judgmental thought, right? So we might have a judgmental thought, and it might be a very complex set of emotions or feelings that arises. Could be annoyance or anger that's arising, aversion, and then shame, right? So it all depends on our makeup, right? Some of us might feel shame for angry thoughts or aversion. We might have thoughts of just a lot of clinging, a lot of craving something, right? And then we might shoot ourselves down for that, or think, oh, I can never get that. Basically just different forms of holding ourselves in low self-worth. So often it's not just the judgmental thinking that needs compassion. It's all of these reactions that happen around it. And of course, this is all, I guess you could say, supported or helped through the second key point I made. The more awareness we cultivate, actually, the more aware we become of the different kinds of reactions that arise around our thoughts, our feeling world, our emotions, etc. So to me, compassion means meeting the moment, and meeting the moment with, full awareness, or as much awareness as we can bring, and a willingness to be with that moment. Right? Not every moment is uncomfortable, nor does it have to be, but it should include that. We can include that, right? And it's so beneficial when we do, when we learn to flip our normal attitude towards uncomfort, that this is something to be pushed away, this is something I don't want, right? And so I hope you're starting to see like this framework shift a little bit, right? If this is some newer information to you, some newer ideas, that compassion is the whole essence of how we then approach judgment, because judgment is the opposite of compassion. Judgment is this fixation on reality being a certain way, usually a very rigid, boxed-in way. And so when we allow thoughts to arise and fall, there's also an element of compassion in there. When we directly connect with and or feel or our felt sense or reactions around a judgmental thought or a judgment we're having, there's also compassion there. And I would just say, when we're even just willing to, do this kind of work, when we're willing to even hear something, such as what I'm sharing here, and those of you who have gone all the way into the episode here, that's compassion, right? Like, why are we here anyways? Why am I doing this? Why are you listening to it? It's because we care. It's because we have some element of compassion where we want to learn to work with ourselves and, of course, with others in the world with more care, in a way that's going to provide more well-being for ourselves and others. And so those are the main key points I wanted to discuss around how to work with judgmental thoughts. Of course, there's many more, but I just thought to keep it simple and practical for you. So as always, I would love to hear your feedback, especially those of you who requested me to talk about this, and just hear how that's going. And of course, it's a process, so we're not going to be perfect at that. And it's more of a path. It's a journey for us. So I really wish you the best on that journey. And as always, feel free to reach out if you want some help on that journey. I'm happy to point you to things and or support you as much as I can in your practice. Thanks so much, and have a good one.